The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of my small apartment, casting a warm glow over the familiar chaos that was my life. I pulled myself out of bed, the soft creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet a comforting reminder of the home I had built here, in this corner of Tehran. The faint aroma of brewing coffee wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the sounds of the city slowly waking up outside. I could hear the distant hum of motorbikes and the occasional honk of a car, a symphony of urban life that had become my daily soundtrack. I padded to the kitchen, where I found my mother, her hands deftly rolling out dough for the traditional bread we always shared on weekends. She looked up, her smile warm and inviting, as if the worries of the world had no place in our cozy home. "Morning, sweetheart. You're just in time. I made extra," she said, her voice softening the edges of my sleepiness. "Thanks, Mom. You know I can't resist your fresh bread," I replied, leaning over to kiss her cheek. She always knew how to make me feel grounded, even on days when anxiety crept in like a shadow, whispering uncertainties. As I sat down at our small kitchen table, the sun streamed in, illuminating the vibrant colors of the hand-woven tablecloth. I watched my mother work, her hands moving rhythmically, like she was dancing to a tune only she could hear. The kitchen was filled with the comforting sounds of everyday life, the crackling of the bread on the hot stone, the light chatter from the radio perched on the counter, and the faint laughter of children playing outside. Over breakfast, we talked about the mundane, my plans for the day, her latest batch of pickles, and how the neighbor's cat had taken to napping on our porch. The world outside felt distant, even though the news crackled in the background, a reminder of the unrest that had been simmering for years. I caught snippets about protests and political tensions, but we had learned to navigate these discussions carefully. Mom would always say, "Let's not spoil our meal with what we cannot change." After breakfast, I grabbed my bag and headed out, the warmth of my mother's bread still lingering in my stomach. The streets were alive with people heading to work, vendors hawking their goods, and children in uniforms rushing toward their schools. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of spices and fresh produce fill my lungs. This city, with all its chaos and beauty, was home. I arrived at the small bookstore where I worked, a cozy nook tucked between a cafe and a tailor's shop. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and the familiar scent of old paper and coffee enveloped me. My boss, an elderly man named Mr. Rahimi, was already behind the counter, sorting through new arrivals. He looked up and smiled, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ah, you're here. I have a stack of books for you to shelve. The new shipment came in yesterday," he said, his voice warm with enthusiasm. I nodded, grabbing the books and settling into my routine. As I organized the shelves, I lost myself in the stories contained within those pages, each one a world waiting to be explored. The quiet of the store was a welcome escape, allowing me to forget, if only for a moment, the whispers of uncertainty that lurked beyond our walls. Throughout the day, customers came and went, exchanging pleasantries and stories. I loved the way they would linger, their faces lighting up as they discovered a new title or shared their favorite reads. It was in these moments that I felt connected to my community, even as the world outside seemed to sway with tension. During my break, I stepped outside for some fresh air. The sun had moved higher in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement. I found a small bench across the street and sat down, watching the world pass by. A group of teenagers laughed and joked as they walked by, their carefree spirits a stark contrast to the conversations I had overheard earlier in the day. "Did you hear about the protests last night?" one of them asked, his tone casual yet underlined with concern. "Yeah, but it's always like that. They'll get tired and go home," another replied. They laughed again, but I could sense a hint of unease beneath their laughter. I took a sip of my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. I didn't want to dwell on the negatives. I had my own worries, like how to pay rent this month and whether my father would call. He had been working at a nuclear facility for years, and while he always assured me he was safe, the uncertainty of his job weighed heavily on my heart. As the afternoon wore on, I returned to the bookstore, where Mr. Rahimi was busy with a customer. I took a moment to organize the display at the front of the store, arranging the titles just so, when I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. It was a sound I had become all too familiar with, yet it still sent a chill down my spine. "Everything all right?" Mr. Rahimi asked, noticing my distraction. I forced a smile. "Just the usual, I suppose." He nodded, but I could see the concern etched on his face. He had lived through more than I could comprehend, and I knew he felt the weight of the world pressing down on us all. The day passed slowly, each hour stretching into the next, filled with the gentle ebb and flow of customers and conversations. As I closed up the store, The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I walked home, the streets now quieter, the shadows growing longer. When I stepped through the door, the comforting aroma of dinner greeted me. My mother was humming softly as she prepared our evening meal. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, knowing that amidst the uncertainty of the world outside, there were still moments of peace to be found within these walls. "Did you have a good day?" she asked, glancing back at me with that same warm smile. "It was all right. Busy, as usual," I replied, slipping off my shoes and joining her in the kitchen. As we sat down to eat, I felt a sense of normalcy envelop me. The clinking of forks and the soft hum of conversation filled the room, momentarily drowning out the distant sounds of unrest. I held on to these moments tightly, knowing that in a world filled with uncertainty, it was the small things, the laughter, the shared meals, the love of a mother, that truly mattered. Each morning, the sun would filter through our kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden table where my mother and I shared breakfast. But today, the light felt muted, as if it were struggling to break through a thick veil of unease. My mother hummed softly while kneading dough, but I could sense a tension lingering in the air, a heaviness that wrapped around us like an unwanted blanket. As I sipped my tea, I noticed the faintest tremor in my hand, an unwelcome visitor that seemed to echo the quiet disarray of my thoughts. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to a lack of sleep, yet deep down, I knew it was more than that. The world outside our apartment felt different. The usual sounds of the bustling street below, children laughing, vendors shouting their wares, the occasional bark of a dog, seemed muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. After breakfast, I grabbed my bag and stepped outside, greeted by a chill in the air that was unusual for this time of year. The street was quieter than I remembered, the laughter of children replaced by hushed voices. I passed by the market, where the vibrant colors of fruits and vegetables felt dulled, overshadowed by a palpable tension. People moved with purpose but spoke in whispers, glancing around as if expecting someone or something. I stopped at a fruit stall, where an elderly woman was arranging pomegranates. Her hands trembled slightly, and when our eyes met, a flicker of recognition passed between us. She leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you heard about the siren tests? They're longer now, much longer." Her gaze darted around, as if afraid someone might overhear. I nodded, though I hadn't heard anything specific. The sirens had always been a part of our lives, a reminder of the world we lived in, but now they seemed to carry an ominous weight. I bought a few pomegranates, feeling the cool skin against my palm, grounding me momentarily in the familiar. As I walked toward the bookstore, my mind buzzed with the fragments of conversation I had overheard. Rumors swirled about people disappearing, neighbors packing their things in the dead of night, and children drawing tanks and soldiers in their notebooks. I tried to dismiss them as mere whispers of fear, but the knot in my stomach tightened with each step. Inside the bookstore, I found solace in the rows of books, their spines lined up like sentinels against the chaos outside. My coworkers greeted me with forced smiles, their eyes betraying a flicker of concern. I busied myself with arranging the shelves, but my mind drifted to my father. I hadn't heard from him in days, and the silence gnawed at me. He had been working at the nuclear facility, and I recalled the last time we spoke, his voice taut with worry as he mentioned something unsettling he had discovered. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. The day passed in a blur of customers and conversations, but the atmosphere felt increasingly charged. A siren wailed in the distance, longer than usual, its shrill sound piercing through the air like a warning. My coworkers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from boredom to concern, and I felt the tension in my own body mirror theirs, a collective unease that settled over us. As the evening approached, I closed up the store and made my way home, the streets darker than I remembered. Shadows danced along the walls, and I quickened my pace, my heart racing with an inexplicable dread. I reached our apartment and found my mother in the kitchen, her back to me as she chopped vegetables. The familiar scent of dinner wafted through the air, but it did little to soothe my fraying nerves. "Did you hear the sirens today?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. She paused for a moment, the knife hovering above the cutting board. "Yes, they were quite loud." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the slight tremor beneath it. "But we mustn't let fear dictate our lives. Dinner will be ready soon." As she continued to chop, I caught a glimpse of her hands, moving with a practiced rhythm, yet I could see the way her fingers trembled slightly. I wanted to ask her about the rumors, about the people who were disappearing, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I busied myself setting the table, the clink of dishes a small comfort amid the growing tension. We sat down to eat, the silence between us thickening. The food was delicious, a traditional dish that usually brought us joy, but tonight it felt heavy on my plate. I forced myself to chew, each bite a reminder of how normalcy felt like a mask we both wore, hiding the anxiety festering just beneath the surface. After dinner, I tried to distract myself with a book, but my mind kept wandering back to the unsettling changes around us. I glanced out the window, where the streetlights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that twisted and turned like the thoughts racing through my mind. "Mom, have you noticed anything strange lately?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Strange? No, dear. Just the usual." But I could see the worry etched on her face, the way her lips pressed together tightly, as if holding back words she didn't want to say. I wanted to press further, to dig deeper into the unspoken fears that loomed between us, but instead, I nodded and returned to my book, the pages blurring as I fought against the rising tide of anxiety. As the night wore on, I could hear the distant sounds of a commotion outside, a low murmur that seemed to grow closer. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I glanced at my mother, who was now staring out the window, her expression distant and troubled. "Mom, what's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We must stay calm, my dear. Whatever it is, we will face it together." But as I looked back out into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, that the world outside our little haven was beginning to boil over, and we were caught in the simmering heat of uncertainty. The morning light filtered through the window, casting a soft glow over the cluttered kitchen. The smell of sautéed onions wafted in the air as my mother prepared dinner. I could hear her humming a tune, a small gesture of defiance against the rising tension that had settled in our lives. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to find comfort in the mundane, but the unease gnawed at me like a persistent ache. I had just returned from the bookstore, where the familiar smell of old pages and freshly brewed coffee usually brought me solace. Today, however, the chatter of the customers felt stilted, like we were all actors in a play that had lost its script. The rumors were buzzing again, hushed conversations about sirens, about people not returning home. I had tried to shake it off, to convince myself that life would go on as it always had, but the weight of uncertainty pressed down on my chest. My phone buzzed on the table, and I picked it up with a flicker of hope. It was a message from my father. My heart raced, but as I opened it, the words were nothing more than a simple update. "I'm fine, don't worry." Yet, the absence of detail felt like a warning, a reminder that he was far away and isolated. I looked at my mother, who was now slicing vegetables. "Have you heard from Dad today?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. She glanced up, her expression wavering. "Just the usual. He's busy." The air thickened around us, and I could feel the unspoken words hanging between us. We both knew that busy was a euphemism for something darker. I wanted to press her, to dig deeper, but the look in her eyes silenced me. Instead, I returned to my phone, scrolling through messages from friends, but everyone seemed preoccupied with their own fears. Then came the sound, the distant roar that gradually intensified until it vibrated through the walls. It felt like a tremor, a deep rumble that resonated within me. My heart dropped. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtain aside just in time to see a plume of smoke rising in the distance. My mother appeared behind me, her breath hitching as she took in the sight. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise outside. I felt a wave of panic surge through me, washing over my rational thoughts. "What is happening?" I asked, but the words felt hollow. I already knew. The roar grew louder, and the ground shook beneath our feet. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the table for support as the first explosion shattered the quiet. The night stretched out endlessly, the silence in the apartment amplifying the chaos that swirled in my mind. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with my eyes, each fissure reflecting my own fragmented thoughts. My father's absence was like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating, and no matter how tightly I closed my eyes, I couldn't escape the reality of his disappearance. What could he have reported that put him in danger? The question gnawed at me, a relentless itch beneath my skin. I remembered his smile, the way he would ruffle my hair when I was feeling down. I could almost hear his voice, calm and reassuring, telling me that everything would be all right. But now, That voice was an echo, fading into the distance, drowned out by the distant rumble of fear that echoed through the streets of Tira. I sat up, the sheets tangled around my legs, and glanced at my phone. The screen was dark, devoid of any new messages. I had already read his last message 100 times, dissecting every word, searching for hidden meanings, hoping for a clue that would guide me to him. But it was just a simple, "I'm okay, don't worry." How could I not worry? The world outside had changed overnight, and I felt like a prisoner in a crumbling fortress, desperately trying to hold onto the remnants of a life that felt increasingly unreal. A muffled sound pierced the silence, and I rushed to the window, peering out into the shadowy street below. The usual hum of life had been replaced by an unsettling stillness. My heart raced as I thought of my father, alone in whatever dark corner he had been forced into, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to scream, to cry out for him, but the weight of fear wrapped around my throat, choking me. What if he needed me? What if he was out there, calling my name in desperation, and I was too afraid to answer? I thought of the neighbors, the ones who had looked at me with pity when they saw my mother and me wandering through the streets, searching for news. Their eyes were filled with unspoken words, a shared understanding of the terror that had seeped into our lives. Should I reach out to them? Should I risk dragging them into our nightmare? I leaned back against the wall, my breath quickening as images flooded my mind. I saw my father's face, lined with worry, and remembered the way he would pull me close when the news turned grim. "We'll get through this together," he had said. But now, those words felt like a cruel joke. I was alone, and the weight of that loneliness settled heavily in my chest. The decision loomed before me, a specter that refused to fade. Should I stay and wait for news that might never come, or should I leave and search for him? The thought of stepping outside, into a world I no longer recognized, sent shivers down my spine. What if I encountered the very forces that had taken him? What if I became another name on the list of disappearances? I pushed my hands through my hair, feeling the tension coiling within me. I could feel the panic rising, tinged with a sense of helplessness that threatened to consume me. I closed my eyes, trying to envision a future where my father was safe, where we were sitting together at the kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter. But that image faded quickly, replaced by the harsh reality of unanswered questions and the cold, hard truth that I might never see him again. Tears streamed down my face, and I leaned forward, burying my head in my hands. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I struggled to breathe. I thought of my mother, her quiet strength, and how she had always been the anchor in our family. I wanted to confide in her, to share my fears, but I knew that she was already carrying her own weight. I couldn't add to her burden. The thought of isolation crept in, wrapping around me like a blanket of despair. I felt as though I was standing at a crossroads, with each path leading to uncertainty. I could reach out, but what if it only brought more pain? Or should I continue to wait, in this purgatory of fear and hope, until the day dragged me into a reality I wasn't ready to face? The faint smell of burnt food wafted through the air, a reminder of the dinner I had left unfinished in my rush to process my thoughts. I had always found solace in cooking, but tonight, the kitchen felt like a battleground, a place where I fought against my own demons. I forced myself to stand, to move, but every step felt leaden, as if the weight of my indecision was pulling me down. As I approached the stove, I noticed the half-prepared meal, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. The vegetables lay forgotten, and I realized how much I had been neglecting myself. It was as if I was caught in a loop, replaying the same moments of worry and despair without any resolution. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself in the present, but it was hard to escape the spiral of thoughts. I remembered my mother's words from earlier that day, "We must stay strong, no matter what." But how could I be strong when every fiber of my being was screaming for action? I needed to decide, and the weight of that choice felt like a lead ball in my stomach. I could sense the ticking clock, each second amplifying the urgency of my dilemma. I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. The street was empty, the shadows stretching long in the dim light. I took a breath, and the decision loomed larger, pressing down on me. Should I venture into the unknown, or remain shackled to this fear, waiting for a glimmer of hope that might never come? My heart raced as I took a tentative step forward, my pulse echoing the uncertainty that lay ahead. The night stretched before me, an endless abyss of uncertainty, and the shadows in our apartment seemed to whisper secrets I was too afraid to uncover. I clutched my phone, its screen dimly illuminating my face, as if it could somehow bridge the distance between my father and me. I had replayed his last message over and over, searching for hidden meanings, desperately clinging to the hope it inspired. "I'm safe," it said. But safety felt like a cruel joke now. The silence in the apartment was deafening, punctuated only by the distant rumble of unrest outside. My mother sat in the living room, her eyes glued to the window, but I could see the tremors in her hands. I wondered if she felt the same suffocating dread that enveloped me. The weight of our shared fear hung heavy in the air, a reminder of everything we had lost and everything we could still lose. I thought of my father, of his unwavering resolve, his deep voice always filled with a strange mix of authority and warmth. He had faced dangers I couldn't begin to comprehend, and yet here I was, paralyzed by my own fear. The thought of him alone, far from home, haunted me. I couldn't let the darkness swallow him whole without trying to reach him. "Mom," I said, breaking the silence, my voice shaky. "I need to go look for him." Her head snapped toward me, eyes widening with a mix of surprise and fear. "Are you out of your mind?" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "You can't go out there. It's too dangerous. I can't just sit here and wait." I shot back, the desperation clawing at my throat. What if he needs me? What if something happened and he can't get back? My mother looked away, her expression crumpling into a mask of worry. "You don't know what you're asking. The streets are filled with chaos. You could get hurt. Or he could be hurt," I whispered, the reality of it settling in my bones like ice. I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. How could I leave her alone? But the thought of my father alone in a world that felt increasingly hostile made my resolve harden. A moment of silence stretched between us, filled with unsaid words and unacknowledged fears. I could see the turmoil in her eyes, the battle between protecting me and facing the truth. Our lives were already unraveling. Taking a deep breath, I made my choice. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I have to do this. I need to see if he's safe. I turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling like a betrayal to my mother. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced around me as I reached for the doorknob. My hand trembled as I grasped it, a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I paused for a moment, looking back. "Please, don't do this," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't stay here. I love you, but I have to find him." With that, I stepped out into the night, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like a heartbeat. The cool air hit my face, sharp against my skin, mingling with the scent of smoke and uncertainty. My heart raced as I took in the dimly lit street, shadows moving like ghosts in the distance. I felt exposed and vulnerable, a lone figure against the backdrop of a city on the brink. Each step echoed in my ears, a reminder of the choice I had just made. I was leaving behind the safety of our apartment, the only sanctuary I had left, and stepping into a world where every corner held the potential for danger. As I walked, I recalled the last time I had seen my father, his smile warm and reassuring. I could almost hear his voice in my head, urging me forward, telling me to be brave. I clung to that memory, letting it guide me through the fear that threatened to engulf me. The streets were eerily quiet, each sound amplified in the stillness. I passed by familiar landmarks that felt altered, transformed into something unrecognizable. The bookstore where I spent countless hours was shuttered, its windows dark. The scent of burnt fabric lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the chaos that surrounded us. I approached the corner where we often met after his long days at the facility. My breath quickened as I turned, scanning the street for any sign of him. But it was empty, just shadows and echoes of my hopes. A sudden noise broke the silence, distant shouts, the sound of sirens rising like a chorus of despair. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt the weight of dread settle heavily in my stomach. I pressed forward, driven by a mix of fear and determination, the thought of my father urging me on. As I reached a nearby alleyway, I spotted a group of people huddled together, their faces shadowed with worry and fear. Approaching them cautiously, I realized they were discussing the recent disappearances. My pulse quickened at the mention of my father's name, and I stepped closer, desperate to hear more. "He reported something unusual at the facility," one voice said, trembling with urgency. "They say he might be in danger." My heart sank, and the world around me blurred. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, the reality of what I might hear crashing over me like a wave. I was losing him, slipping through my fingers like sand. In that moment, I realized the weight of my decision. I had stepped into the unknown, and the cost was becoming clear. I was searching for someone who might already be gone, a choice that could lead to more pain than I could bear. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to know. I had to fight against the darkness that threatened to consume us. The choice to seek him out was the only way I could reclaim a piece of my own heart, even if it meant facing the worst possible outcome. With renewed resolve, I pushed past the fear, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. I was no longer just waiting for news. I was actively seeking my father, even if that meant chasing shadows through a city engulfed in turmoil. A few weeks have passed since that night when I stepped into the shadows of uncertainty, leaving behind the warmth of our home. The streets, once filled with anxious whispers and hurried footsteps, have grown quieter. The echo of fear lingers, but there's an unsettling calm that has settled over the city, as if it too is holding its breath. I find myself waking up each morning to the soft light filtering through the window, casting gentle patterns on the floor. My mother still prepares breakfast, her hands moving with a practiced grace, but there's a heaviness in her silence. We sit together, the clinking of plates and the faint steam rising from our tea the only sounds breaking the stillness. I realize now that our conversations have become less about the world outside and more about the flickers of memory that bind us. I often think of my father, the man whose presence felt like a sturdy wall against the chaos of life. Each day, I search the news for any hint of him, any sign that he's still alive, but the stories I find are often drowned in a sea of sorrow. I keep his photograph on the table, a reminder of the man who once filled our lives with laughter and warmth. I've started to draw a little, creating scenes from my memory. Us at the park, his infectious smile, the way he would always find the right words to soothe my fears. Each stroke of the pencil feels like a quiet homage to his absence. I remember the night I left home, the weight of my decision pressing heavily on my chest. The streets were dark and filled with uncertainty as I searched for any sign of him. Those moments, which felt surreal and terrifying, have morphed into a memory I carry with me, a reminder of the courage I didn't know I possessed. Each time I close my eyes, I see the faces of those I encountered, the shared pain and the stories of loss that connected us. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the living room, I stumbled upon my father's old coat hanging in the closet. I hesitated before touching it, as if afraid it might crumble into dust at my fingertips. I pulled it out and held it close, breathing in the familiar scent of him, an oddly comforting mix of fabric and faint cologne. I draped it over a chair, allowing it to hang there like a silent sentinel of our shared past. It felt wrong to put it away, but I also knew I couldn't keep it hanging forever like a specter of what once was. In the weeks that followed, I began to write letters to him, pouring my heart onto the pages. I shared everything, the mundane details of my day, the fears that gnawed at me, the small triumphs that felt hollow without him. I sealed each letter in an envelope, tucking them away in a small box beneath my bed. In a way, it felt like I was keeping him alive, preserving the bond we shared even in his absence. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed my mother looking at me differently. Her eyes held a softness, a mix of pride and sorrow, as if she understood my journey. One evening, she joined me on the balcony, where we sat in quiet companionship, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was a canvas painted with hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the chaos that had become our lives. "Your father would be proud of you," she said softly, breaking the silence. I could hear the tremor in her voice, a reflection of her own pain. "You are brave, my dear." Her words settled around me, wrapping me in warmth, and I realized that our shared grief had forged a new understanding between us. I didn't need to carry the weight of my father's absence alone. We were in this together, navigating the uncharted waters of loss and uncertainty. Each morning, I now find comfort in the routine, the gentle clink of dishes, the laughter that sometimes escapes despite the heaviness in the air. I've learned to appreciate the small moments, to hold on to the fleeting beauty of life amidst the chaos. I no longer search for my father in the streets. Instead, I find him in the stories I tell and the memories I cherish. One evening, as I sat on the balcony with my mother, I noticed an untouched coffee cup resting on the table. It had been my father's favorite, a small, chipped mug with a faded design. I picked it up and cradled it in my hands, feeling the weight of his absence. I made a decision then, to leave the cup there as a reminder, an acknowledgement of the love that still lingered in our home, even in his absence. As the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I realized that while the world outside remained chaotic, there was a quiet strength within me. I had transformed in ways I never expected. I had learned to face my fears, to embrace the uncertainty of life, and to find beauty in the moments that seemed insignificant. The journey continues, and though my father may be lost, his spirit lives on in the stories we share, the love we hold, and the resilience we nurture. Life carries on, even amid the war, and I am learning to navigate this new world, one day at a time. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing. Stories like this need to be told and heard.